All right, so this is some very sad and disturbing news, and something that just recently happened with this guy. The ATF just shot him dead in his house. They had a warrant for his arrest and a warrant to go into his house because of some gun sales he made, I guess. But he was some big shot at the airport, or some airport in, I think, Little Rock. But just disgusting. Let's check it out.
Shooting facility. Of course, that's Security Gun Club right here in Woodinville, Washington. Hey, we're going to talk about a story that got a lot of attention, got a lot of people pretty spun up last week. It had to do with a very horrific raid by the ATF into a private residence in Arkansas on a gentleman named Brian Manilowski. Mr. Manilowski was also the manager of the Bill and Hillary Clinton Airport in Little Rock, Arkansas, but had been engaged in some activity, quite questionable activity, which would have probably provided, or did provide, probable cause for an arrest of him. However, it's what the ATF did and how they went about making the arrest that really has a lot of people shaken up, and for good reason. Now, this is an organization which has really been let off the leash the last few years. And candidly, the product of that is very disturbing and should be alarming to all of you. So today, let's spend a few minutes and let's talk about proof that the ATF has no problem killing you. Okay, so this is what we're talking about today. We are talking about the rather strange home raid of a gentleman, now deceased, who managed the Clinton Airport in Little Rock, Arkansas. His name is
Okay, so this is the guy. Excuse me, I'm getting text about a birthday. So this is the guy now. That was this airport exec that they had gotten a search warrant for his house. And went in there at 6 o'clock in the morning and shot him dead. Probably woke him up out of his sleep. He didn't know who the fuck was coming through the door, and he did what anybody else would do, and he got killed because of that. And that's just like common sense. Like, look at this guy. You don't think you can go to the airport and talk to him or get him to turn himself in? Like, he's obviously thinks he's operating below the radar, and he might try and lawyer up or talk his way out of it. I don't think he would get violent over it. I don't think, just by looking at the guy and just judging from his track record, you got to give a guy the benefit of the doubt before you do some shit like that. So that's your fault. His death is on your hands for that. And let's see. Let's go to
Brian Manilowski. Now, Mr. Manilowski, for whatever reason, was selling a multitude of firearms, and the allegations, according to the probable cause affidavit and search warrant, which we ourselves have now been privy to and read, is that this investigation commenced in December of 2023. Okay. Once the ATF commenced this investigation, what really led to this was some trace on some firearms which were found at crime scenes that consistently came back to Mr. Manilowski. Now, in this very large and thorough probable cause affidavit, there is allegations that firearms that Mr. Manilowski sold to private individuals did end up at 3 crime scenes. The crimes, however, for which the crime scenes were created are never listed. So we do not know at all if any of these were violent crime scenes. And one could imagine that if they were, that probably would have ended up in the probable cause affidavit. So its absence is significant. When the ATF got their hooks into Mr. Manilowski, they did a rather...
I want to just say he makes a good point right there. With them leaving out the details of the crime, is because they weren't violent crimes. From what I've seen and from what I've read, they were just basically, guys got pulled over with these firearms. They got searched, and the firearm was found on them with maybe a little bit of weed or something like that. And when they ran the trace on the firearm, it came back as stolen from this guy. And those are the crimes that the ATF is talking about that they were linked to. Just probably, and they probably might have violated some of these people's rights that they found the firearms on too. So we don't know how all that went. So let's keep getting into this.
Thorough investigation, because what they discovered is that he was purchasing large amounts of firearms, sometimes
20
multiple
to
firearms
30
of
or
the exact
15 of
same
one
make
gun.
and model. He was then selling many of these firearms, and he was doing so without conducting any type of background checks or 4473 paperwork or anything required by federal law to lawfully sell a firearm. How does the ATF know this? Well, they were working with confidential informants who were actually purchasing these firearms from Mr. Manilowski, and they themselves actually observed Mr. Manilowski doing this at multiple gun shows in the greater Arkansas area. Now, understand, Mr. Manilowski had no clue that he was currently being investigated, so he engaged with his quite regular activities, which did include purchasing large amounts of firearms and then selling them at gun shows. This was actually witnessed by undercover ATF agents, according to the probable cause affidavit.
Yep.
The ATF also used confidential informants to purchase these firearms in an illegal manner from Mr. Manilowski, either at the gun shows or in other locations, including parking lots. You can imagine, since they were regularly trailing Mr. Manilowski since roughly the end of 2023, they got incredibly familiar with his day-to-day routines and where one could normally find Mr. Manilowski. They were abundantly aware of what his vehicle was and that it was actually owned by the airport that he managed.
Now, this is another great point this guy brings up, and is the root of everything, and is just the whole issue right here. And this is wrong with this. What's wrong with this country today, and why they continue to get away with they get away with is because they can do this, and everybody knows why they do it, and nothing happens. That's basically the reason. So let's see here. No accountability. They can just do whatever they want.
They were abundantly aware of what times he left for work days, what time he would depart his property. They were abundantly aware what time he would get to work and what time he would leave from work. They even knew the exact parking spot that Mr. Manilowski would use each day, because the director has his own designated parking lot at the airport. So you have an an individual now that you believe has engaged on multiple occasions of selling firearms without being a federally firearm licensed dealer. Okay, let's assume an arguendo that you have probable cause to arrest Mr. Manilowski for these offenses. Now, one would think, because we always talk about officer safety, what is the best way to ensure officer safety? One would think that since you already know what his entire schedule is, that you would devise a plan that would probably put your agents in the least amount of risk. For example, perhaps setting up a roadblock as he drove into the airport, perhaps just waiting for him outside in the parking lot when he got out of work one day, perhaps just walking in with a bunch of undercover agents and going into one of the many Arkansas gun shows where he was just sitting there all by himself and arresting him there. Any way in which you could have taken Mr. Manilowski into custody for further investigation upon a finding of probable cause would have been advantageous not only to Mr. Manilowski, but more particular to the ATF agents who apparently are putting their lives on the line every day to protect our communities.
So right there, he's right. I mean, he's definitely right. Why, things are more likely to go sour when you do something like that. Out of all the times you can do it, that you're allowed to do those warrants from 6 a.m. to whatever time at night, everybody would agree that the time you chose to do it in that 18-hour time frame that they give or whatever it is the worst time. Is the worst time you could possibly do it. Which, you have analysts for this type of stuff to figure this stuff out.
But one must question whether or not the ATF now unnecessarily puts its agents' lives on the line. And one must seriously question what value they place on any of your life. And the reason I bring that up is rather than pulling Mr. Manilowski over on a routine traffic stop and taking him into custody there, rather than walking into his office at the airport and taking him into custody, rather than just being with a bunch of agents in the parking lot, when he got off work every day at 5 o'clock and walked to his car, you could have taken him into custody there. Maybe you could have just gone to one of the gun shows, but no. That's not what the ATF did. No, what the ATF did instead was obtain a search warrant and then decide that they were going to serve the search warrant on Mr. Manilowski's house at 6 o'clock in the morning. And so when they raided Mr. Manilowski's house at 6 o'clock in the morning, no one knows whether or not Mr. Manilowski even knew that he was being raided by federal agents or if he was the subject of a home break-in. So what would any individual who values the life of their family do if they believe that their home is being broken into by intruders? That's right. He armed himself and he attempted to defend his family. And what happened to Mr. Manilowski?
And they knew.
Well, he was shot in the head with a high-power rifle.
Of course he
and
was.
is now deceased.
Of course he
was. The entire purpose of search warrants is to accumulate evidence of a crime. And the entire purpose of an arrest warrant is to provide authorities with the ability to place an individual under arrest. Now, amongst the many duties and responsibilities that come to that is to make the arrest in the safest possible fashion. Safe for the individual you're taking into custody, safe for all of the officers who are involved in the arrest of this individual, and safe for any other citizen or bystander who may be around when that arrest is made. The ATF here had multiple occasions. Consider if they just would have waited for Mr. Manilowski to pull out of his driveway and drive to work that day. They could have pulled him over as if it was a routine traffic stop, had multiple agents swarm in, take him into custody, problem solved. And at that point, Mr. Manilowski is no longer occupying his home, which of course you have a search warrant for, which means you can now execute that search warrant in peace. And if in fact there is evidence of criminal activity, you will be able to retrieve that. Now, what should concern all of us here is multiple things. Number one, as we know, the current Biden administration, the ATF, is trying to develop new rules as what it is to be engaged in the business of being an FFL. And
I want to say they're just totally letting the ATF interpret the Constitution and the laws the way the ATF wants to interpret them, which is no bueno.
This is a logical outgrowth of the enforcement of that otherwise unconstitutional rulemaking order. The second thing that we all need to be concerned about is this is what happens when we begin to over-police alphabet agencies that are really meant to be a regulatory agency. And ask yourselves then, if this is what the ATF is going to do, what's the IRS going to do if they're allowed to arm all of their agents? And then finally, what we must really, really understand is that
that's what's going to come down to armed
out on the street,
IRS agents
in many ways really are out there trying to actually stop bad people who are doing bad things, who deserve to be taken off the street. My concern is that the management of the ATF from Director Dettelbach on down is rotten to the core. Rotten to the core to such a point that they themselves no longer value human life. Obviously, the family's already got attorneys involved. This is not the end of the story. There will be continuous information coming out on this, and I think at some point there may even be some litigation. We'll link up the probable cause affidavit down below so you can.
All right, so let's see. Well, you heard it there. I seen the whole search warrant read by another guy, and it listed a lot of stuff that they said this guy did. Basically, he sold pistols without doing a background check, is what they're alleging. But now with him so conveniently permanently deleted, we only have one side of the story. And I think that's just real convenient for the ATF. I think that they probably realized once they got in there, things were going to go sour, and that they needed to be able to control this narrative of how it has played out and what the actual evidence really was in their investigation and things like that. because now they can pretty much almost close the case on certain things, and they could use the act of investigation to not release a lot of the documents. So you got to think about that too. So I don't know. Tell me what you think if you watch this. So thank you.